Chapter 2. The Weight of the Crown. Find out who is in charge, he rasped as he lay on the broken ground. The command directed more at his own failing senses than any of the stunned soldiers watching from the shadows. Through the haze of pain and the drifting smoke of the burning city, his dark vision picked out a figure of singular authority. She was the anchor of this sinking city. He felt the presence of the silver-haired woman before he saw her. Her shadow fell over him, cold and long. An older woman, distinguished by the silver of her hair and the sharp, tactical precision of her movements, stood near a makeshift command post. Her uniform was battle-worn, stained with the soot of the siege, but she wore it like a second skin. A deep scar traced a jagged path across her cheek, a map of a life spent in the service of steel. "You're in no condition to be moving," she said, her voice like grinding stones. She signaled a medic, her expression a complex brew of curiosity and stern concern. "Who are you, and what possessed you to challenge the Tide's commander in single combat?" The battlefield around them had fallen into an eerie, expectant silence. The blood tide had faltered at the sight of their leader's head, but the city was still bleeding. Otnam forced his eyes open, meeting her gaze with a defiance that defied his broken state. "I would speak with the person in charge of this city," he coughed, a spray of crimson flecking his lips. "Only then will I answer questions. I did just win your battle for you, after all." A flicker of respect, brief as a spark, crossed her weathered features. "Confident, aren't you?" she remarked, a ghost of amusement in her tone. "Very well. I am High Commander Lyra Stormwind. If you can walk, you'll be brought to the War Council immediately. If not, you'll be carried like the casualty you are." Otnam didn't wait for the soldiers. With a grit that bordered on the suicidal, he forced himself upright. He leaned heavily on the two soldiers Lyra signaled to assist him, his knuckles white as he gripped their pauldrons. Every step toward the heart of the city was a testament to his determination. The medallion he had stolen from Krell, the pulsing, dark heart of the enemy's power, felt unnaturally heavy in his hand, a cold weight that thrummed in opposite rhythm with his own heart. As they moved through the streets, Otnam looked at the devastation with eyes that saw more than just ruined stone. He saw the failure of those who had allowed this to happen. "For this to happen to a city of this size," he muttered to Lyra. "Your war council is out of their depth. They are in desperate need of a leadership change." Lyra's grip on his arm tightened. "And what makes you qualified to critique our leadership, stranger? You who woke in the rubble without a name. What critique?" Otnam gestured vaguely at a collapsed tenement where a child's toy lay abandoned in the ash. "Look at the city around you and realize I speak the truth." Silence was the only response to this. Lyra didn't answer. A heavy, bitter silence followed them all the way to the council chambers. The doors were ornate, imposing things of oak and iron, a grotesque contrast to the blood-slicked gutters only yards away. Inside, the atmosphere was glacial. 7 figures sat around a massive circular table, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows that made them look like ghosts. Military commanders, city officials, and advisors all turned to look at the blood-soaked man supported by 2 weary guards. "The individual responsible for Krell's defeat," Lyra announced, her voice echoing in the vaulted room. Otnam didn't wait for an invitation. He shook off his supporters, staggering to the edge of the table. "So this is the War Council?" he rasped, his voice dripping with contempt. "A bunch of cowardly people huddled around candlelight for protection while their city fights and dies in the dark?" A senior military advisor, his face a roadmap of scars, stood abruptly. "Who are you to hurl insults in this chamber? How could you let this happen?" Otnam shot back, his voice gaining strength from his fury. "You sat here while the walls breached. You sat here while the blood tide fed on your people." The room went still. The anger in the advisor's eyes faded, replaced by a hollow, haunting shame. "Intelligence failures," a counselor said quietly, stepping into the light. "We trusted a network of spies that turned out to be vipers. We were caught in political webs with neighboring kingdoms while the tide rose. I mean to take control of this city from this day forward, Otnam declared, the audacity of the claim ringing like a bell in the silent room. By right of conquest, any opposition, and I will march you before the people you failed, to be judged for your crimes. The intake of breath was collective. Lyra's hand twitched toward her sword, but she held. By what right? The advisor challenged, though his voice trembled. By the right of the man who killed the monster you feared, Otnam said, pulling Krell's medallion from his tunic and letting it clatter onto the table. I forced the tide into retreat while you sat in the glow of your candles. If you have a better claim, make it now. Taking control isn't as simple as killing a warlord. The diplomatic advisor, an elderly woman in fine robes, said softly. What exactly do you propose?
Name me king, Otnam said.
The word hung in the air, heavy and impossible. And I will protect the people not from a council chamber, but from the front lines. The silence that followed was longer than any before. Lyra Stormwind studied him, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Kingship isn't granted, it is earned. After today, do you think the people would care for your definitions of earned? Otnam asked. I saved them. You hid. If you want to talk about deeds, let us go to the streets. Let us see whose name the people cry out. Lyra's expression hardened. You overstep. This is governance, not a tavern debate. Then put it to a vote of the people, Otnam challenged. Let them decide who leads the reconstruction. Let them decide who they trust to hold the gate when the tide returns. Lyra arched an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine approval crossing her face. A vote? Unprecedented. Dangerous. She paused, the candlelight reflecting in her silver hair. And yet, perhaps exactly what this city needs. Very well, we will put it to the people. But be warned, the people's judgment is as harsh as the sea. Then let's leave the council to their candles, Lyra, Otnam said, turning toward the door. We have a city to save. They emerged back into the night. The city was a landscape of dying fires and emerging hope. Otnam didn't head for a bed. He headed for the wounded. To attention, he shouted. His voice magically amplified to echo through the ruins. Any soldiers still able to fight, gather around Commander Stormwind and I. We head to the field hospital. Gather the wounded as we go. A ragged group of 15 fighters assembled, drawn to the sound of a voice that didn't sound like a politician's. They moved in formation, picking up the fallen, applying makeshift bandages. Otnam's dark vision was a godsend, spotting survivors trapped under beams and wounded soldiers bleeding out in the shadows. At the field hospital, the air was thick with the smell of iron and herbal poultices. Dr. Elena Blackwood, a woman whose hands were permanently stained with the work of saving lives, looked up as they arrived. Lyra introduced them. I came here to personally thank you, Otnam said, stepping forward, for staying where the work was, rather than hiding where the walls were thickest. Elena paused, her eyes searching his. We do this because it must be done, not for praise. But we are stretched thin. Our supplies are low. What can you truly offer us? Beyond words. Otnam didn't answer with words. He reached into the well of his power, weaving an illusion that shimmered across the city. Spectral images of Dr. Blackwood appeared in every town square, her face etched with the noble exhaustion of her work. A haunting, compelling voice, his own, spoke through the images, calling for the people to support the healers, to bring what supplies they had, to find hope in the service of others. The effect was immediate. A stream of people began to arrive, carrying blankets, clean water, and food. But the night was not over. Otnam sought out the rank and file, finding a group of soldiers led by a man named Sergeant Marcus Ironheart. Marcus was a map of scars, a man who had seen too many sieges to be impressed by a new face. Talk with me, Sergeant, Otnam said, sitting on a crate and gesturing to his own blood-soaked bandages. We are both tired from today's butchery. Marcus took a long pull from a flask of bitter spirits and offered it to Otnam. Killing one commander doesn't win a war, the sergeant grunted. The tide is a hydra. You cut off one head, two more rise. Magic and pretty words won't rebuild the walls. I cannot bring back the dead, Otnam said, handing the flask back. Only evening glory can claim those debts. But I can help your people break what is left of the enemy. I will not lead by word, but by the edge of my blade. Lyra, show me to the gates. By the time they reached the eastern gate, the weakest point in the city's broken shell, their group had grown to 30. Otnam walked out into the darkness alone, his dark vision piercing the night. The silence of the wasteland was deceptive. Then he heard it, a low, rhythmic thrumming, the sound of 1,000 boots hitting the earth in perfect, terrifying unison. This wasn't a disorganized remnant. This was a fresh wave, organized and hungry. He stepped back inside the gate, his face grim. They are coming, and they are many. Under his direction, the soldiers worked with a desperate, renewed purpose. They constructed a massive V-shaped barricade behind the broken gate, creating a killing box designed to funnel the attackers into a narrow, lethal zone. Spearmen took the front, their points a forest of steel. Swordsmen held the wings, and archers took the high ground. Otnam stood at the very point of the V, directly in front of the gate. You're taking an enormous risk, Lyra warned, standing beside him. The men need to see their leader at the gate, Otnam replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the first silhouettes of the new army were beginning to emerge from the gloom. Not behind a wall. The ground began to tremble. The rhythm of the marching feet grew into a roar. The second wave had arrived, and Otnam stood ready to meet them. The night was not empty. It was occupied not by soldiers, not by flame, but by something unseen, something listening. The air was a cold, stagnant soup of wood smoke and the copper tang of blood. Smoke hung low, thick and unmoving, coating the tongue and settling in the lungs as though the world itself had forgotten how to breathe. Behind the jagged, broken ribs of the eastern gate, the city, or what remained of it, held its breath. Not in peace, but in suspension, as if the city had been placed upon a cosmic scale and something beyond sight had yet to decide which way it would fall. Otnam stood at the breach. Where stone had once promised safety, now it framed only absence. Firelight dragged his shadow long across the fractured ground. It followed him, but not quite. There was a delay, subtle and wrong, as though even his shadow hesitated to remain his. The stolen medallion in his hand pulsed. Cold, measured, unyielding. It did not beat with his heart. It contradicted it. Each pulse felt like it was opposing him. A sensation of fire running up his arm that confirmed a truth he no longer trusted. He whispered to himself, the words lost to the wind. So this is why you sent me. Lyra, he said without turning. His voice was quieter than it should have been, yet it carried with a weight that demanded silence. Guard them. I told you I would lead from the front. I remember making that promise. That thought lingered, bitter and sharp. He was no longer certain he remembered why he had made it, only that the promise existed, a ghostly anchor in a sea of forgotten identity. Behind him, Sergeant Marcus Ironheart stood a few paces back, his knuckles white around the haft of his poleaxe. Steady? Otnam whispered, though whether to the soldiers or the ghosts in his own head, even he did not know. They're marching in cadence, Marcus said, his voice low and grim. This isn't a raid. It's an execution. Otnam stepped forward, past the gate, past hesitation, past the last place a man could remain what he was. The ground beyond was churned mud and broken stone, soaked with blood that had not yet decided whether it belonged to the living or the dead. It clung to his boots as he moved, as if even the earth recognized the wrongness of his path. 20 paces. That was all it took. 20 paces to leave humanity behind.